Hello, everybody, and thank you all for joining us today for our presentation on ExxonMobil crisis communication. I personally would like to introduce you all to the team. We are Top Notch Consulting, a premium consulting firm based here in Fort Collins, Colorado. My name is Andrew DeStasio, and these are my partners on the project.
My name is Josh Brown.
My name is Gabby Minear.
And I'm Tanner Krenzine.
During the presentation today, you may be asked to refer to certain handouts during some slides. You each have received a packet with all of the presentation information as well as handouts following the slides, if you would like to follow along with that. Moving forward onto the next slide we have arranged for you is the agenda for today's presentation. Firstly, we will then talk about COVID-19 and the oil and gas industry. Then we will discuss the analyses of past ExxonMobil communications. Following that, we will discuss concerns about current shareholder communications. We will then provide our recommendation as a consulting firm for future communication. At the end of the presentation, we will have a section used for any questions that you might have gathered today. Josh is now going to present the downturn of the oil and gas market during COVID-19.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Andrew. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected all facets of the economy. Workers across the country have lost their jobs, travel has ceased, small businesses have collapsed, and the stock market has struggled to regain its balance. One market that was hit particularly hard has been the oil and gas market. As COVID-19 made its way into the US, the price of crude oil began to rapidly drop. In fact, in late April 2020, the price of US crude oil was negative for the first time ever. The price of gas was less than $1 in certain parts of the country. From the middle of March to late April, there was a strong inverse relationship between the weekly COVID-19 world infection cases and the weekly world crude oil price. Supply and demand for oil across the country was disrupted by country-imposed lockdowns and economic stagnation. As a result, production slowed significantly and demand dropped. According to the International Energy Agency, global demand for oil was down 30% compared to the same period in 2019. Oil producers were struggling to cope with excess oil, and there was no end to the pandemic in sight. As you know, your company ExxonMobil is one of the world's largest publicly traded international oil and gas companies. However, ExxonMobil has not been impervious to the decline of the oil and gas industry. Recently, job cuts, poor third quarter earnings, and a decline in market value has dominated media headlines. ExxonMobil has a reputation of being a dominant big oil powerhouse. However, a little company you may have heard of called Zoom has surpassed Exxon in market value. The world has shifted in unexpected ways. As we enter the new year, supply and demand is still struggling to maintain the balance it had pre-pandemic. However, a negative 38.88% change in ExxonMobil's stock price from January to July 2020 has given your investors much anxiety regarding the future. A drop in stock price coupled with a potential 15% global reduction of your workforce has given cause for worry. On the other hand, with effective investor communication that will be covered in this proposal, ExxonMobil still has the opportunity to remedy this situation. Andrew will now review past Exxon investor communications.
Thank you, Josh. Exxon in the past has had trouble communicating effectively with their current shareholders. These reports and headlines indicate that Exxon has shown ineffective investor communication in their current channels. The first quote comes from The Guardian, which is an online news source and explains how Exxon was not honest with their shareholders about their effect on climate change. And while this presentation is not exclusively about climate change, it is ultimately about how the information from this company is presented to their shareholders and how effective it is. Unfortunately, this has created troubling financial circumstances for Exxon and their current investors. This last quote comes from Exxon claiming that their portfolio and future impacts have good intentions, but is another example of needing to communicate with shareholders more effectively. Exxon needed to inform their investors with more details on what, quote, meeting the world's energy needs, end quote, really means to them. So Gabby is now going to go ahead and take over from here, and she's going to walk you all through the pros and cons of your current communication channel.
Thank you, Andrew. We will now look at your current communication channel that that you use to communicate with your investors. You currently have an investor relations website that investors can go to and find general information about the business and other resources. You also have postings of annual reports that contain information on business fundamentals. These are pros for your communication with investors. However, there are some cons to layout and communication of the site. For instance, the annual reports are very extensive and contain a lot of information for the investors to comprehend. This also makes the site feel impersonal. The investors want to feel like they are cared about and that their partnership with Exxon is important, which leads to another con of the website. The site doesn't give investors the ability to communicate with each other and share similar points of view, which could give that personal touch you may need to communicate with your investors. However, this is a good start to proper communication with your investors. This leads into the next slide, which I will talk about the benefits of different communication channels. As I mentioned above, Exxon doesn't have a place for investors to communicate to each other. This type of communication channel is beneficial because the investors can share their points of view. They can find common ground and discuss the positives or negatives with the company. This could eventually benefit Exxon. If investors share similar views on issues with the company, then Exxon knows they need to address it. Another benefit to having an investor-to-investor communication channel is it enables investors to gain more knowledge of the company, because maybe they found something out from an investor that they missed in the annual reports. I also wanted to lay out the benefits of having good communication between the company and investor, even though your department already has a site to communicate with its investors. But it is important to have continuous communication with your investors to let them know of current and important information, which makes the investors feel their partnership is important to Exxon. Moving on from that, our team found an article that could be beneficial to Exxon and their transparency. The article is How Great Leaders Deliver Bad News. And the author mentions several key points that would be good for your company to use when communicating with its investors. The article says to take responsibility for your actions. Don't make up any excuses. By doing this, it shows the investors your confidence, honor, and courage. Secondly, it is important for you to listen to your investors. In the article, the author stated, once you've let the big cat out of the big bag, you need to let people say what they think and feel about it. Basically meaning, let them say what they need to, and then address the investors' concerns and issues based on what they said. Next, it is important to say what you'll do next to inform investors of your intentions and how you will handle this bad news. But just make sure when you're communicating this information to also be accurate, be consistent, speak up, show that you care, and do what you say. And now Josh will discuss the investor blog.
Thanks so much, Gabby. The previous slide that Gabby brilliantly outlined covered the fundamentals of effective communication that would result in greater transparency for your company, ExxonMobil. Such ideas as taking responsibility and listening applies to both internal and external entities that your company interacts with. However, these key ideas are only the start to improving communication channels. Our first suggestion is to implement an investor blog. For reference, please refer to the handout you have been provided. This investor blog is unique in that only shareholders of ExxonMobil have access. This specialized investor forum provides opportunities for investors to engage with other investors with no interruption from ExxonMobil itself. Investors are given login information that gives them access to discussion posts with other shareholders, expert stock analytics, corporate updates, and anything else that investors feel is important. Investors will develop a sense of community that is vital to positive investor-company relationships. A positive relationship emphasizes transparency, trust, accuracy, reliability, and so much more. This blog will capitalize on all aspects of strong investor relations. A communication channel that promotes a sense of community and personal interaction will increase trust and transparency across the investor relations spectrum. Tanner will now discuss our second recommendation.
Thank you, Josh. If everyone can please refer to the second handout in your packet. You will find an email addressed to ExxonMobil shareholders. This is an example email that the investor relations team can use to notify shareholders of both the bad news of third quarter losses while providing information about the new investor blog. Two professors from Harvard, Jeffrey Supran and Naomi Oseks, published an extensive peer-reviewed analysis examining past Exxon communication about climate change. The analysis found Exxon has historically misled the public. Unfortunately, many business journals and reporters have cited this analysis, which has greatly impacted the public perception of Exxon. The manner in which a company communicates bad news has a large impact on the credibility of the company. Therefore, it is important to have consistent and reliable communication with shareholders, and this sample message intends to increase transparency to eliminate any misleading information. In business communication, we utilize the indirect approach when delivering bad news. With the indirect approach, we provide rationale and reasoning before making a specific request of our audience. This approach is most effective for Exxon because we expect an emotional response from our audience. Personal monetary losses can affect many facets of one's well-being, and using the indirect approach helps the reader better understand and accept the message. The bad news in this sample message is also subordinated using the passive voice. These techniques aid in buffering the emotional response we can anticipate from shareholders. Finally, we use the FAIR test to ensure that this is an ethical business communication. I will run through the FAIR test using the sample communication in handout 2 to demonstrate its importance. First, the information is factual and not intended to mislead the audience. Sentences such as, like many facets of the economy, the oil and gas industry has been impacted by COVID-19, frames the context of the message while remaining factual about current market conditions. The next aspect of the FAIR test is access, where we ensure there's no hidden agenda in the communication. And the purposes of this message are to provide greater visibility to shareholders. Next, we examine the impacts of the message. Statements like Exxon strongly believes that developing nations are a prominent market for crude oil and gas give access by demonstrating why the company has made the investments that it has. This provides reasoning while also providing greater visibility for Exxon shareholders. And finally, the last dimension of the FAIR test is respect. And sentences such as, we understand your concerns regarding how Exxon intends to respond to the global pandemic, shows that inherent respect of the audience is considered, especially since investors are an integral part of Exxon's ability to thrive. Another effective technique that we use in business communication is incorporating ethos, pathos, and logos, which are utilized in the message to enhance the persuasion appeal. Ethos establishes credibility for the sender, and this is evident in the second paragraph where Exxon states its losses are normal for the oil and gas industry during COVID-19. Logos provide reasoning, rationale, and facts. In the fourth paragraph, rationale behind Exxon's investment in crude oil is provided while reinforcing this rationale with analyst predictions about an optimistic future for the crude oil and gas industry. Last, pathos is used to emotionally appeal to the audience. In this message, pathos is utilized in the beginning when we tell shareholders how valuable they are, and at the end of the message and the statement of goodwill when we say stay safe and healthy in the context of the pandemic. To wrap up, what Top Notch's goals are with these communication changes and recommendations are to improve investor-to-investor communication and increase overall credibility for Exxon. By taking responsibility and listening to all stakeholders, Exxon can enhance investor relations. And how we recommend accomplishing these goals is changing the basis of how the investor relations team at Exxon communicates with investors and the public. However, our communication strategy focuses on shareholders, because they are very influential over public perception of any company that they support. By implementing new communication channels like an investor-to-investor blog, Exxon has the ability to improve its reputation for communication while more rapidly addressing any concerns that investors may have. Blogs are especially effective during crisis communications. And furthermore, written communications with shareholders that utilize techniques like ethos, pathos, and logos, and that are also scrutinized under the fair test framework, ensure that you have an ethical and persuasive business communication.
All right, well, this brings us to the end of the presentation. This is the part where we have time allotted for any questions that you might have gathered today. If there aren't any, I would just like to say thank you for coming and listening to our presentation today, and I really hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you so much.